Micah chapter 7 Introduction. The prophet begins in a sorrowful strain. He describes the situation in Jerusalem, how the people became thieves and murderers, and how God is ready to punish them all. Yet, there is also much confidence in God. This prophecy might refer to a time when the army from Babylon destroyed Jerusalem. People had become very wicked then. The prophecy may also refer to an even later end time. Luke 12:53. Micah saw also what would happen after the time of punishment. He saw that God would rule his people in the end. Then people would rebuild Jerusalem, but it would not be like the old Jerusalem. The government would be fair, the nations would give honor to God, and the people would be grateful because God is so kind. The book finishes with a song about success and a declaration of thanks to God. Verse 1. It is a terrible thing for a man to find good men growing very scarce and to see wicked men becoming more wicked than ever. It makes him feel very lonely, and joy seems to be banished from his heart. Micah says that God looks for honest officials in Jerusalem, but he cannot find any good officials. Here, Micah speaks God's thoughts. Vineyard refers to the men in Israel, Isaiah 5 1-7. The fruit refers to good men and women. He writes a story about God. In the story, God is like a poor person. He enters a vineyard. It is just after the main time when people harvest fruit. God hopes to gather a little fruit to eat after the main harvest, but he cannot find any fruit. There was a law about harvest in Leviticus 19:9 and 10 in order to provide for poor people. It allowed them to gather the fruit, but the law did not allow farmers to go back to the field a second time. They should not remove the small groups of fruit that remained. They had to leave it just for the poor people. Expecting the same, God desired the ripe fruits, but found no cluster to eat. Verse 2. The ones that obey God's covenant and moral laws no longer exist. They try to make each other fall into the trap. It is as if each man hunts his brother with a net, as a hunter who proceeds with all craft and diligence to catch the prey. Psalms 10:8 and 9. It seems that everyone is completely bad. Perhaps there used to be some good people in the city, but the wicked have affected them. The city's people in general have become wicked. By God's standards, all the people are bad. Verse 3. Micah now names the crimes that people do. He speaks about the wicked judges. They change their decisions in the court. They take money for that. Such payments are called bribes. Exodus 23:8. The prince does not merely ask the people for money, they force them to pay. The great men do not make good and fair decisions. They just do whatever they want to do. Both hands, the judges and the prince, are experts in how to do evil things. The great man speaks aloud the desire that is in his heart. These rulers make their evil plans together. They spend money in each other's company. They spend time in each other's company. And together they plot cruelty, murder, and wicked acts, and jointly promote violence and bloody cruelty. Honesty seemed to have died out of the nation. The highest people in the land, who ought to have been beyond the power of bribery, sold the administration of justice to the highest bidder. Ah, those were ill times indeed. Verse 4. Sin brings sorrow in its train, and as nations will have no future as nations, God deals with national sin here upon the earth and visits it with national punishments. A bush with thorns causes pain and injury. Even the best officials are like briars. The judges do not act fairly. They do not give fair decisions. The most upright are separate from the people. Why? Their sharp thorns keep them apart from the poor people. You try to get past them, but the thorns will hurt you. That ruler causes only trouble. He does not help the people. The legal system seems like people's enemy. Watchmen are true prophets of the Lord who were discredited and despised. The day has come when the true prophets will be credited and the false prophets will be punished. The day that God visits will be the day of punishment for their iniquities. On that day, the people will be surrounded and entangled with calamities and distresses and not know which way to turn themselves or how to get around them. Verse 5. So saturated with dishonesty had the nation become that the evil had penetrated even into domestic life. Where all should have been in a state of mutual and happy confidence, the prophet felt bound to tell them that confidence could not exist between those who appeared to be friends or even between husbands and wives. Isaiah describes these events well. Isaiah 3:4-5. Relationships between people will break down. A husband will make plans to try to protect himself. Even his wife will not know his plans. He will hide them from her. If she discovered the plans, she would use the information for her own advantage and save herself. That is what the husband would be afraid of. The most important thing for each person would be to stay alive. Nobody would care about anyone else. Verse 6. Without the fear of God, even the nearest and dearest relationships cannot be trusted. When Jesus came, it brought the same difficulties. Luke 12:53. Husbands and wives do not remain loyal to each other. Everywhere we see confusion and fear in every village, town, and city. Verse 7. There was nowhere else the prophet can look. According to what he tells us, all men had become false. Therefore, he says, I will look unto the Lord. Micah changes his mood here. He forgets about the bad news now. He is confident. Previously, Micah spoke about punishment. Verse 4. Now, he trusts in God's salvation. God will save both Micah and the remnant. There are three ways in which he trusts God. Number 1. Micah looks for God who will help him. He will watch with hope. Number 2. Micah waits for God's salvation. He knows that the Lord will save him. Number 3. Micah says, my God will hear me. Micah is confident of that. Verse 8. The words I and me here refer to the people in Jerusalem. Now Jerusalem is in darkness. Its enemies surround the city. The enemies are waiting to attack it. It is as if Jerusalem's people are in prison. One day things will be different. They confess their sins. They know that God is always right. He will act in a right way. God will bring Israel's people out into the light. In other words, He will show the truth to His people. Watch for His light. Thus you shall behold not your own righteousness, but His. Verse 9. Listen to this testimony of the prophet. Put your trust in God, for he will appear to deliver you. Let this be your joy. Sit still in humble patience and bear the indignation of the Lord. For even though trouble is laid upon you, it is not so heavy as it might have been, and it is not so severe as it would have been if the Lord had dealt with you in strict justice. Therefore, in patience, possess your soul and wait quietly before the Lord. Be not without hope, but behold his righteousness. Verse 10. This verse relates to the nation which at that time was oppressing Israel. These enemies should have their turn for suffering. They shall be crushed beneath God's foot as the mire is trodden in the streets. Verse 11. Micah has spoken about his belief in God. He now speaks a message about hope. In that day appears 3 times in verses 11 and 12. It refers to a time in the future. It also refers to the future state of the world. It is a time when the people in Zion will rebuild their walls. The walls here do not mean walls that protect the city. They are not the same as the walls of a castle. They will include walls of vineyards. They will include walls that protect the sheep. Jerusalem will be a place where the people and the sheep will be safe. Verse 12. The other nations will be like the sheep. There will be enough space there for all the sheep to enter. They will find safety there. The sheep, the other nations, will find protection under the walls. He will also be their shepherd. Then people will come from all over the earth. The nations that live around Israel have been their people's enemies. People will come even from those countries. They will come from Assyria, which is on the northeast. They will come from Egypt, which is in the southwest. People will come from sea to sea. They will come from mountain to mountain. They will come from all over the world. In the Hebrew text, the word come refers to only one person. It gives the idea that each person has a choice. Each person must choose whether or not to come. Micah does not refer to all the people from all the nations. He refers to separate persons that come from all the nations. They will find their salvation inside Zion. All people that look for God will find him there. Verse 13. God will punish the people that are still elsewhere on the earth. That will be the result of their sins, the fruit of their doings. This is a wonderful expression. All doings bear fruit of one kind or the other, and sinful doings bear bitter and deadly fruit. Woe to the man who is made to eat the fruit of his own doings. Because of the many wicked things people have done, the earth will become like a desert. This will be the time when at last God punishes them. Revelation 20:11-15. Verse 14. Micah's prayer to God is an urgent one. He prays that God will bring back the original benefits. God's people in Micah's day were like a little flock of sheep hidden away from their enemies in the midst of the wood. God will bring them out to far larger liberty. They shall have Bashan and Gilead to be their pasture as in the days of old. Now They shall have such liberty that everywhere they shall worship and praise the Lord their God. The rod is the shepherd's protective rod. It also means a king's authority. God is the shepherd of Israel's people, and he is also their king. Bashan and Gilead were the first places that God gave to the Israelites. Numbers 21:33. The people produced plenty of food there. Bashan was famous for its large trees. Isaiah 2:13. It had healthy animals. Gilead was famous for its good and pleasant fields. Numbers 32:1 and 26. It was on the middle of the mountain called Carmel. Carmel is like a garden. That time will be a good time to live. Verse 15. God promises to answer Micah's prayer. God first looks back to an earlier time. He reminds Micah about the past events. God had done many wonderful things a long time ago. There were the times when the Israelites were in Egypt. God rescued the Israelites from the cruelty of the Egyptians. He made a way for them through the Red Sea. He kept them safe in the desert. Then the Israelites crossed the river Jordan. They won many battles against many nations, although those nations were much stronger than the Israelites. He promises that those kinds of events will happen again many times. The people will see similar wonderful deeds. Even more marvelous things will happen in the future time. Verse 16. Micah thinks about the promises that God has made. God will do extraordinary things. Not only will the people in Assyria see those things, all nations will see what God has done. They will be ashamed. They will realize that their own gods are false gods. They will lay their hands on their mouths. This means that they will be struck dumb at Israel's marvelous deliverance, that they can no longer boast about themselves. They will hear so much about God's deliverance to Israel and messages about Israel's victories that their ears will be deaf. Verse 17. The other nations will give up their power. Their kings will lose their battles. They will lick the dust. Licking the dust like a serpent is an action that shows their defeat and humiliation, where they lie down because they are afraid of the other kings. Moving out of their holes like worms of the earth means that they will come out of their strong castles. The nations will tremble in front of the Lord. They will realize that they have no power. The nations will want to worship the Lord. Verses 18 through 20. These verses describes our wonderful God and His goodness. The people sing this final song to praise God. God gives the words of this song to them. The song starts with the words, "There is no other God like you." Micah's own name actually means, "Who is like God?" According to the Hebrew text, Micah is referring to his own name here. God is a God who has forgiven His guilty people and does not remember their sins any longer. He has compassion on them. The book ends with a wonderful message about hope. There was a comfort. There is a comfort. Our God is a covenant-keeping God who will perform every promise that He has sworn to our fathers from the days of old. We must trust, and God will always be with us. We need to live by God's rules. Then our lives will have a good effect on our homes, our society, and our world. Micah chapter 7 questions. Micah chapter 7 answers to the questions.